Well, hello everyone. Welcome back. I said I was going to try and do this next video in something under a month, and so here I am. Some of my incentive at this point is that the series, which is on the age of chaos, is becoming more and more relevant as the world becomes increasingly chaotic. Just last night, I was my wife and I were talking about how all this Ukrainian, Russian, Eastern European instability thing ties in with fossil fuels as a resource and also global heating. And it's actually really interesting how that works. I haven't seen too much discussion how the invasion of Russia plays into that topic. There is some belated tacit recognition that Russia is assuming that their control of the flow of oil and natural gas to the West, principally Germany, gives them leverage to do whatever they want in Eastern Europe. Putin might be right. We'll see what that's about. But the way that ties in with global heating is really interesting and pretty destabilizing. So I'm not going to talk about that here. I might at some point, but that's not really the topic. But it is apropos to the topic, which is these are the sorts of things. These are the kinds of plays that we really have to expect to see in the opening days of the age of chaos. Expect more of the same. Just expect more of the same. Now, today, I promised I would talk about the other fork in the road less taken, the road maybe that's impossible to take at this point, but we need to discuss it so that you can decide if it's impossible or out of reach or not for you and your community. Put it on the table and let you figure that part out. It is the controlled demolition. The age of chaos, just to recap quickly, the age of chaos is going to be dominated by chaotic events. This is already turning out to be the case. The age of chaos is going to lend itself to a long-term event of demolition, where our civilization, Western industrialized civilization, and its exports to the rest of the world, so Asia, Africa, South America, and the way that has spread itself through the world to become global, that civilization is on its way out. And I'm not saying that because I'm some apocalyptic visionary Christian or rapturist or something like that. And it's written in scripture or some other maybe more traditional way of approaching the problem. I'm saying it because that's what the data suggests. We built and before I veer into the controlled demolition, I want to, again, kind of set the stage a little bit. So we came into this civilization of ours about 300 years ago, certainly 200, and we grew the human population almost exponentially. We've been doubling the human population. It feels to me like about every 50 years, but maybe it's a little shorter than that. You can't do that without fossil fuels. You can't do that with some big juice. You need juice to double your population at all. And to do that multiple times in series without any hiccups is a lot of juice, okay? So we've had that juice. We've been doing that. We've made amazing strides. We have a lot to be proud of as a people. All of us together in the world, the human population, we have much to be proud of. We have accomplished many great things in medicine, education, cultural exchange, various forms of inventions and technology, and space exploration, and we've done amazing things. There's just no question about it. I'm really afraid that we're going to lose most or all of those in the coming decades. And by decades, I mean plural. I mean 2. Okay, I don't mean 8 or 10 decades. I think by the end of 2 decades, I think we will have either figured this out and turned the corner, and we've got a plan, or we're just not going to have a plan. It may be already too late to have a plan. We're already too late to fight climate change. That ship has sailed. I mean, that It's going to be so obvious to everybody in a few years that ship has totally sailed, gone over the horizon, is lost to view, that we won't even need to be just discuss it anymore. So when I say in the future, we have lost the fight against climate change, that ship has sailed, everyone's going to say, yeah, that's true. We'll give that a few more years. We'll give that a few more years to percolate through everyone's head that, yes, that's the truth. But have we lost the battle to save something of what we've accomplished by burning fossil fuels and, of course, sadly, upsetting the apple cart of the Earth dynamic climate system? We'll see. Today's discussion is about that. I keep not having the discussion, but I'm trying to set the parameters of why we're even having this discussion for the talk to be relevant. The uncontrolled demolition is the wide path. It's the path of really not changing anything, not even talking about it. Just don't have the conversation, and you'll end up on the easy path. Everything you've ever known is there. It continues to go until it goes over the Seneca Cliff, and then you have nothing, or at least you have whatever the universe grants you as a random gift. That's what you have at the bottom of the Seneca Cliff. The controlled demolition takes a very different approach. So let's talk about that, shall we? The controlled demolition is not avoiding demolition. Again, that ship has sailed. We are screwed. We are totally in a hole, and we're still digging, and we can't get out, and this is going to be bad. The risk is that we take no steps of any kind to save something of what we have accumulated and acquired over the last 300 years of technological development, and the last 1,000 years of cultural development. Will we take anything forward? And what should we take forward? What must we take forward? What can we agree is absolutely necessary to just throw every resource we have at making sure that one thing, that three things, that dozen things goes forward? And what things absolutely are not going to go forward, that it's just ridiculous to talk about. Just don't even go there. Don't waste my time. Let's not waste our collective time talking about bringing forward things that are essentially, running on unicorn farts or something. It's just an appeal to magic. You're appealing to magic to think you're going to have some of the things we have today. So just don't go there. We're having an adult conversation here. We're not talking about the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. So what are the parameters of this discussion? If you and I and some other like-minded people were to sit down to have a serious discussion, not in the pub, drinking, half drunk, pounding on the table, making an argument, but a serious discussion. We got one shot at this. Let's figure this out. If we were to do that, we would have to have parameters for what can be discussed, what can be entered as data, and what has to be set aside. It's a short list of things that must be set aside. Even though it's a short list, I will tell you right up front, I'm not naive about this. I understand the challenge I'm presenting to you with the short list of things we cannot consider. There's a risk that you'll just walk away. I don't care. I am not here to accommodate you in your fantasies. Here's the short list of things we absolutely have to set aside, period. Maybe for all time. Maybe for the rest of human history, we must set these things aside. They are three: politics, economics, and religion. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have those things. That doesn't mean you can't pursue those things. That doesn't mean you can't dedicate yourself to those things. That doesn't mean you can't get a PhD in political science, or a PhD in economics, or a PhD in theology. It doesn't mean you can't get the Nobel Prize in economics. Okay? It just means that we have to set those aside. You can pursue those. People can pursue those. Large groups of people can pursue those things and celebrate those things and talk about those things, but not in the context of saving civilization. Those need to be hobbies. And let me just point out right away, they're dangerous hobbies. Those are dangerous hobbies. I would actually have to have another video. I refuse to go into it here because I am setting those things aside. In this video right now, for this conversation, I'm setting those things aside. I'm not going to talk about them. They are exceedingly dangerous. They are vastly corrosive, and I am setting them aside. Done. You want to talk about that? Go find another YouTube channel. You want someone to satiate your concerns about God and money and political parties? Go find another YouTube channel. Now, you can stay on this channel and you can come back, and somewhere towards the end of the age of chaos, maybe I'll talk about these things. And if these things are important to you, prepare to be savagely disappointed. Prepare to be savagely annoyed with me. Because I'm going to tear those topics up by the roots. So what can we talk about? Also a short list. A short list of things you, the typical viewer of a YouTube channel, could not care less about. You don't care about these things, and your level of concern is so impoverished that you actually could not care less. The things we have to discuss in extremity are physics, biology, and resources. The Earth's limits of resources. Where are they? Who has them? How are we going to apportion them? How we're going to use the last of the resources we have and need. Resource allocations, physics, biology. That's it. Now, if you know anything about me, you'll say, hold on, I just noticed something here. You are a physicist, an engineer, and a biologist. And, so of course those are important to you. You could take that approach. I like my fields of study. I like the things I've done with engineering and biology. I like the work I've done as a software engineer and an inventor, mechanical engineer, and electrical engineer. I enjoy myself. I don't need to get on here to tell you about my hobby horses. I have no incentive to do that. I am not here to tell you that, oh, I built a widget. Oh, I built a fun thing. Oh, look, I wrote a program. There's lots of people that do that. They get engaged in their hobbies and talk about it on YouTube. I'm not here to do that. That's not my personality. That's not what I do with my life. I don't talk to anybody about anything, ever. I just don't care what you think about my hobbies. I'm here to talk about these things because these are things that are going to save you. And in the absence of discussing these things and understanding how these are a threat to you, they're going to kill you. Planetary physics is going to kill people by the hundreds of millions. Billions of people are going to die because of planetary physics. The Earth dynamic system is coming completely unhinged, and it's going to find people where they are, and it's going to inform them through acts of physics that they are going to die. It's going to kill them with heat. It's going to kill them with starvation. It's going to kill them with water shortages. It's going to kill them with violence. It's going to kill them as they're on the road, barefoot, pushing a handcart full of their families on the road, trying to get the hell away from whatever physics was doing to them yesterday. It's going to kill them. And the ones with money are going to move. They're going to leave. They're going to go someplace else. They may bounce around a couple of times. They may have to pull that little stunt a couple of times before they find the right spot, the spot where planetary physics is just going to skip over. Completely at random, not completely at random. These places have some physical characteristics that make them suitable for human habitation during the age of chaos. I could predict where those places are. I could go to a globe and I'd have to do some study, but I could go to a globe, I could put some pins in the map, and there's probably 10 places where I would be comfortable putting pins in the map where people are going to make it. Those 10 places are going to be where the controlled demolition is possible. Every place else is lost. There is no chance of a controlled demolition in most of the places of this earth where people have accumulated in large numbers. Controlled demolition is impossible. It will be an uncontrolled demolition. You will either have to leave, or you will probably just die in place, or you'll be one of the very few survivors who just gets lucky, pulls it together, survives, stays out of the way, lives in an isolated place. The angel of death passes you over, and the uncontrolled demolition sweeps through your habitat, just destroys most of the people there, missed you, and now it's yours. Good luck. Enjoy. The controlled demolition looks like people sitting down in a moment of clarity and talking about what can we keep, what can we try to keep, and what absolutely has to be set aside. In military circles, this is called triage. And I'll discuss triage bluntly because it really applies here. The idea of triage, battlefield triage, applies. During warfare, troops in the field and civilians are injured by warfare. They come to a field hospital or even just a regular hospital, and there is a team outside the hospital, in the parking lot, down the street. There's a team that's doing triage. And here's how triage works. A person who's injured comes in. They're being delivered out of an ambulance or out of a cab, or they're being carried there by their relatives. They come into the intake center, and there's a physician there who's an emergency room physician who understands trauma, and they evaluate the person and they say, okay, we got 3 categories of people. And these are rough categories. I might mess it up, but I've got a line of people who need to go through intake, and we need triage to very quickly figure out who these people are. One group of people is the people who are going to die shortly. They're going to die shortly. Their wounds are so severe, their injury is so severe, they have lost so much blood, whatever, that person is going to die. They're going to die in an hour or 3 hours or something, but before we can get to them. Or even if we could get to them soon, or even now, it doesn't matter, because their injuries are so severe that they would die even with treatment, surgery, whatever is required. So we take those people who are going to die and we set them aside, and we give them supportive care, morphine, bandages so they don't just bleed profusely in a big puddle, whatever. We give them supportive care that does not involve any medical supplies or medical team. There's nurses or volunteers who comfort them, talk to them, take their final message to their families or the world. If they need a Catholic priest, and they make sure they have a time with a Catholic priest or any other type of spiritual counselor, and they leave the world. That's the first level of triage. The second level of triage is people who just don't need any treatment of any kind. Yes, I know that hurts. That looks terrible. Okay, but that's not going to kill you. That doesn't even need treatment. I mean, in a different world, we would probably treat that. We put you in a clinic, we do something, and then you'd walk home. You just go home. But today we're not going to treat you, because you're going to use supplies for this injury that's fairly superficial, and it's just not worth that, because there's the third group. And the third group of people is, we'll send you home, or we're going to put you in a different part of the intake where you can sit in a chair. We'll have water, coffee, cookies, whatever, so that you can be, again, supportive care, but it's just mostly just to keep you calm and keep you out of the sun or out of the rain or whatever, so that you can go home. Okay. On this side, people that are going to be dead and they need supportive care at end of life. Over here, people who have injuries, but they're superficial, or we decide we're not going to treat those. You sit there, and maybe we'll get to you, or if it gets worse, we'll get to you, or you can just walk home anytime you want to. Just walk home. You're done. And then there's the third group of people who have severe injuries, do need treatment, surgery, whatever. If they got treatment, they would survive. High probability. If they did not get treatment, they might die. So here's this third group right down the middle. Not guaranteed to die, not guaranteed to be okay, but somewhere in the middle. If we treat these people and really focus our methods on them, that means surgery, bone setting, transfusions, an IV drip, all the things, we can save these people. That's triage. That's how it works. We don't tend to do triage except in wartime or during a major natural disaster like an earthquake or something like that where there's huge numbers of casualties. They overwhelm the healthcare system, and you have to make these tough decisions. This person's going to die, or they're already dead. This person can probably walk home. We'll support them for a little while until they're ready to do that. And these people need to see a surgeon or some other type of care right now. It's the same thing with the controlled demolition. Imagine this, that our civilization is made up of many components. I'll name a few. You can name the rest. Schools, hospitals, I don't want to say food delivery, or stores. Okay, so produce stores, meat markets, even clothing stores. Okay, clothing is an essential. Supplies, hardware stores. So retail outlets that supply essentials on a daily basis for many people. Our civilization is made up of various forms of infrastructure. So we have infrastructure for delivering electricity, natural gas, also called methane, water, potable water, taking away sewer, so essentially used water. These are things that make up a civilization. These are all components. And you add to the list, help yourself. All these components are found locally. Of course, every modern country provides these components. That's what makes them civilized. More civilized countries provide these components more reliably or to a wider part of their population. And the goal of really any humane civilization is to provide all the necessities and even really a lot of the niceties to as many people as possible, and ideally all of them. All of them. Float all the boats. I mean, why discriminate? Everybody should be able to participate. I'm going to mention two, maybe more than two. Jobs. Yeah, actually, it's five, and that's not an accident. Personal transportation, commercial aviation, transportation of goods, movement of money, banking, and jobs. I'm mentioning those five. I'll come back to those a lot. Preview of coming attractions. Those five things: personal transportation, aviation, transportation of goods, movement of money, and jobs are doomed. Straight up. Not my fault, not my idea, but they are. So let's proceed. Triage. We sit down, a bunch of us like-minded people, and we probably have to have people from every aspect of civilization present, except politicians, economists, and religious figures. Sorry, guys, your tent is over there, okay? Have fun. The rest of us are going to sit here and talk about reality, okay? Reality, and I don't want to hear about your political reality and your economic reality and your religious reality, okay? Because there's no such thing. Let's talk about real reality, physics, food, clothing, shelter, and the things that support those three. So a bunch of us get together. We represent all the real things in the world. There's a teacher, there's a doctor, there's a nurse, because nurses are different than doctors. They actually provide different levels of care. There's a police officer. There's someone from the utility, electrical utility. There's someone from the gas utility, even if they're the same thing. We want those two people. There's someone from the sewer treatment. There's someone from the housing authority. There's someone from basically every department in your city. Planning, permits, construction. There's somebody from each aspect of the construction industry. So there's someone who represents electrical contractors, plumbing contractors, someone that represents the trucking industry, someone who represents logistics and fulfillment. A lot of people in this room, because all those things are real. Trucks driving up and down in front of my house, delivering goods or food or clothing. The big box shops that are providing lumber and plywood and insulation for housing. These are real things. We would like for these things to go forward. We would like for these things even to be available to more people if that was possible. If we didn't have politics and economics getting in the way, we probably would have had those things available to more people all along. We would have had so many sacrifice zones, which is a real thing. So, let's set all that other stuff aside and let's talk about the real things. Get a bunch of people in the room. They all represent the real, tangible, actual things of food, clothing, and shelter. We do triage. Now, what is the war and what is the problem that these things represented, these real things might not go forward in the age of chaos? There's lots of reasons, which are subsets of the main problem. A plumber would say that my field is highly challenged right now because the supplies that we use to do plumbing in homes, emergency repairs included, all come from overseas. We're having supply chain issues. Hot water heaters are made overseas, as are most of the appliances that use plumbing. So washer and dryer, the dishwasher, even sinks. We can't get a hold of these things. And we have big problems with supply chains. We have big problems that we don't create these things locally. I have what's on my shelf at my shop, but once I go through what's on my shelf at my shop, I'm going to be in trouble if I can't get replacements. So that's what the plumber tells you. And we go around the room. What's got your undies in a bunch? Where are you vulnerable? The baker tells you, my baked goods feed hundreds, even thousands of families a day. And but I have to have flour deliveries. I take delivery of 200 pounds of flour every day. And also because I serve soups, I take delivery of vegetables. And because I'm a franchise, I take delivery of pre-made foods that my franchise operation provides. And I store them, and then I prepare them and I serve them, right? So my bakery and my delicatessen is a very complicated thing. And I'm dependent on deliveries every day, every single day. I have enough stuff for one day of operations, maybe two. Wife just came home. And so on around the table. Now, everyone thinks they understand what their little slice of the daily operation pie requires. Some of them will notice or may volunteer that there is a big problem. There's a big problem. Now, your baker and your plumber and your big box shop, your Home Depot, your Lowe's, some of those people will say, and the biggest problem I have is delivery of raw materials to my shop. I can get fixtures, plumbing fixtures ordered, but I'm having trouble finding trucks to deliver. And I can order 200 pounds of flour a day, and I can order from different providers because it's kind of hard to source these things these days. And my different providers have it, and they can each send me some part of what I need. But I need 3 trucks to deliver the parts that I need. One from the West Coast, one from the East Coast, one from Canada. And I can't find trucks, or I can find one truck. The rest of it is held and delayed. And it takes weeks for these things to show up. And I'm scrambling around every single day, trying to get the materials I need every single day to do the work I do for the people every single day. So our providers that we have in our room, talking about what it takes to make civilization go forward, start to agree on what the big problems are. And you thought it was just because you couldn't get threaded fittings in your plumbing shop and you couldn't get quite enough, potatoes for your restaurant or whatever. But that's not really it. Your problem is you can't find a truck driver to do deliveries. And then someone will say, yeah. And I was talking to my truck driver and after a delivery, and he was moaning and groaning that he's not even making a profit on delivering these things. He's only delivering them because he sees it as a necessary service to keep people fed and clothed. And I asked him, well, why is it so hard to drive your truck and you're losing money? He says, because of the price and availability of fuel. The diesel or the gasoline I need, or the or even just maybe just the repair parts I need for my truck. There's major problems of getting all this stuff to work together. And my big expense right now is fuel. And sometimes I can't even find fuel. And so as we go into the age of chaos, we start to all realize that there's a big picture here that's affecting all of us. And so I'll just cut to the chase. After we've had this discussion, people begin to realize that the major driver of all of our problems, and that's going to be the big problem going forward, is availability of fossil fuels. I'm getting some comments here, and I think I will see who is doing what. People are overwhelmed. Okay, yeah, I get it. I'm not here to make you feel great. I'm here to alert you to the actual challenge of the rest of your life. And the big problem is our dependency on fossil fuels. Now, there was some discussion or some hyperbole in the past about this thing called peak oil, where the economics of pumping oil out of the ground, the cost of doing that would be underwhelmed by the, it would just drive up the price so much that people would stop, using it, and then the producers can't sell enough of it because people aren't using it anymore, and the price is too high, and the whole thing collapses, and all of a sudden we don't have any oil or natural gas or whatever. And then the people said, oh, well, you'll never have peak oil because of technology. We'll just keep improving the way that we extract oil and natural gas, and we'll be able to get oil from deeper in the ground, deeper under the ocean, out of stone, out of shale, out of tar sands, and we'll just keep rolling and rolling and rolling forever and for all time, and have oil and never going to run out. And there was some truth to that. That has been demonstrated a couple of times. About the time we thought we were going to run out of oil, someone came along and says, oh, I have another way to do this. And now that oil is scarce and I can get a higher price for it, my way of doing this suddenly is economically feasible. And again, now people are saying, well, that process of making novel ways of extracting oil and natural gas more profitable, that also can continue forever. Okay, fine, fair enough. Sounds a bit over the top to me, but you made your point. Well, good on you. However, we have another problem, which is that burning all this oil and natural gas and the coal, which is the third leg on the stool, has released enough CO2 and methane into the atmosphere that it's changed our global atmospheric dynamics. It's called global heating. These are greenhouse gases. They trap heat. And as they accumulate in the atmosphere, and there's nowhere for them to go from there, really, not practically speaking, then as they accumulate, we change the energy regime of the planet. Now, if you don't believe that, fine. Have your alternative reality. I don't really care. I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. You just think whatever you want, but physics wins. And so let's talk about physics, shall we? We're going to have to stop burning fossil fuels. We're already seeing changes in the Earth dynamic system that are looking increasingly lethal. It looks really bad. It can only get worse. Literally, it can only get worse. It cannot get better. That is just not how this works. That's just not how it works. It on its own, it never gets better. It just gets worse. And we are not changing the way we do things. Why would we? No one's having this conversation. So it's going to get worse, and the worsening is going to accelerate. It's going to get worse faster. And then we're already seeing evidence that the natural systems that are impacted by our behavior are now going to start behaving in a similar way, basically following us over the energy cliff. And now the permafrost is melting, releasing methane, and forests are burning, releasing carbon dioxide. And it just, we get the ball rolling, and after a while, it's like an avalanche. You don't even have to push anymore. It's on its own now, and it's just going, and we can't stop that either. So that's how it's going to be. The planet is going to heat up. This is going to have serious, major, unavoidable, annihilating impacts on climate. Droughts, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, massive cold, massive heat. I know that sounds contradictory. It's not. I mean, what part of climate disruption isn't registering with people? Yes, you get everything. And as we're seeing here in the US, the only place I get any news, as we're seeing here in the US, you can have these things back to back. You can have record low temperatures, and then the next day, a 50-degree swing in temperatures to have record highs. Actually happening. Actually, that scenario has happened many times this winter. How the hell? Okay, well, we could explain it. I don't want to take the time. You've seen it. You know it's true. And you may not understand it, but frankly, you don't have to understand it. Just accept it. Just accept that that's how it is. We're having weather events that ought to not happen except every 1,000 years, and we're having 5 a month. That's just how it is. Yes, I could explain it. I'm not going to. Accept the evidence of your own eyes. It's being caused by our consumption of fossil fuels. Now, we're going to have to stop doing that. This is why we don't have politicians in the room. Excuse me, that is politically infeasible. We can never stop burning fossil fuels. We need jobs. We need businesses. We need commerce. And I need political contributions from Chamber of Commerce. And no, we can't stop burning fossil fuels. Yeah, that's why they're over in their own tent. And then the economist pops up and says, but, fossil fuel consumption is the engine of economic growth. For the last 300 years, we've been burning fossil fuels. Look at all the amazing things we've done. And, went to the moon, going to Mars, and everyone has amazing $200 sneakers. And, we can't stop burning fossil fuels. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. You have your own tent over there, okay? And then I guess the preacher or the pope or somebody stands up and says, but think about the humanitarian crisis. Think about all the people that are going to suffer and all the injustices in the world and all the economic injustice and all the political injustice. And here you are, you just sent the politician out of the room. You just sent the economist out of the room. But that doesn't solve the injustices we have in the room. We have to float more of the boats. We have to burn the fossil fuels in an equitable manner so that more people can have economic success and more people can join the consumer bandwagon and more people can burn fossil fuels and more people can contribute to the problem. And then I say, yeah, thank you very much. Over in the other tent, okay? You all figure that out among yourselves. And if you ever come up with a solution, let me know. But I know in advance what your solution is going to be. The politician says we have to keep burning fossil fuels, and the economist is going to say we have to keep burning fossil fuels, and the spiritual leader is going to say for fairness purposes, we have to keep burning fossil fuels. And everyone in this tent is going to have to accept that we have to stop burning fossil fuels because climate change, because global heating, because everyone's going to die. Is that good enough a reason for you? Excuse me, I have a question. Yes. Fine. What is your question? It better not be about politics or economics or spiritual growth. What is your question? How do you know we're all going to die? That is a good question. Do I really need to discuss that before we can triage civilization? Around the room, some hands go up. Okay, fine. All right. It's a legitimate question. How do I know that? It's a short story. You're going to have to look it up if you don't want to take my word for it. But I'm going to say what I'm going to say. Take it or leave it. But it is the reason why we have to have this discussion. People used to live on the power of the sun. They ate crops that were that got their water from the rain, directly or indirectly. That, of course, the plants grew under the sun with whatever climate regime was made available by the input from the sun. So it's warm in the summer, it's wet in the winter, it rains at the right time, it's sunny at the right time, and you can grow crops in this place. We ate those crops with nothing but the influence of the sun. Now, we had domestic animals and we had simple wooden tools like plows that we could work the soil with, but it was the animals' energy and it was our energy, and the materials we used came from nature. Literally a sharpened stick, okay, pulled behind an ox. For 10, 12,000 years, that's how we did things. Well, 10,000 years. All the materials we used in the world came from the abundance of nature, all of which was powered by the sun, period. That's the only input, the sunlight. The sun literally powers all life on Earth, starting with plants, simpler, complex plants, up to trees. Animals eat the plants, people eat the plants and the animals, and all of this is driven by sunlight. For 10,000 years, that worked. During that 10,000 years, our population grew from, when we left Africa, there's maybe 10,000 people, maybe a million, up to maybe not even a million, maybe 500,000 people lived in Africa, and some of those left Africa. And as we spread out from Africa, of course, there could be more people in the world. And at some point, we invented domestication of plants and animals. Now, that was a big deal. We also domesticated fire, but apparently we domesticated fire while we were in Africa. So when we left Africa, we took fire with us. But then we domesticated plants and domesticated animals, and we kind of set aside the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. We settled into villages. We pooled our labor, and we managed our domesticated animals and domesticated crops in a collective way. And that was actually a big deal. The amount of calories that we could create through domesticated plants and animals was like 2 orders of magnitude removed from what we could gather as hunter-gatherers. Also, we just stayed in one place. There's a lot of energy involved in climbing mountains and fording rivers and chasing aurochs and all this other kind of stuff. Instead, we just stayed in one place. The cow was there, the sheep was there, the milk was collected here. There was a field full of grains. We harvested the grains once a year. We stored them up in silos. We did really well. We had lots of calories, didn't have to work very hard at it. Low barrier to entry, low risk, and we did really well. And at some point, we became, on this planet, we became populous, and we were 100 million humans, or maybe 200 million humans. And in about the year 1700, I'll explain why that's an important date in a moment. At about the year 1700, we are estimated to be around 300 to maybe 350 million humans. So that's a lot of progress. We had domesticated plants and animals, but it's all driven by the sun, right? We had spread through the planet. We had left Eurasia. After leaving Africa, we had also left Eurasia, traveled into North America, more people there, traveled into South America, more people there. The ice had continued to retreat from the last glacial period, and the interglacial was long and stable, so we could spread into new habitat, cut down the trees, built more cities, built more roads, more trade back and forth. We became more enriched, more populous in different places, and we spread out. And so we became 250 to 350 million humans on Earth. And there was a lot of variation because we were still vulnerable to plagues and war and imperialism and various things. So, and some of the wars that were fought killed tens of millions of people. Genghis Khan, it destroyed entire villages. So there were definitely places in our history when our population decreased. And then things like the Black Death that plagued the Middle Ages, killed a third to half of Europe, dropped the population so much that peasants who used to be abundant and throw away humans, you just use them until they die and you throw them away in a ditch, they became so rare that the kings and lords actually had to start paying them money to work the fields. I need an incentive here. I can work for you, or I can work for this guy, because everyone else is dead. So how are you going to make this worth my while? Explain it to me. And the peasants got a lot of power, and it changed everything in Europe when they rose in power. Europe was never the same. So there was a lot of things that happened up to about the year 1700. And we expanded, we contracted, we have a lot of cultural growth, a lot of trade, a lot of exchange. And then in about the year 1700, 1750, certainly by the time 1800 rolled around, we began growing again. The year 1700 is, in my thinking, was the last time humans lived entirely by the power of the sun, meaning the power of plants. Plants being the only way, really, to convert sunlight into any form of energy that we could use, because we don't really use sunlight directly. We utilize plants, plant fibers, we eat them, our animals eat them, we eat the animals, we use wood, a lot of things we get from plants that have built civilization, but it's all driven by the sun. And we can domesticate plants and we can plant them in rows and do these kind of things. But that got us to about 350 million people, depending on who you talk to. But then we discovered fossil fuels, starting with coal and then moving slowly into crude oil and natural gas. And then our population exploded. And that's why we have to have this discussion. And that's why the triage is going to be so painful. We exploded. Our population doubled about every 50 years or so. I should look it up before I say things like that, but that's how it feels. Maybe it was 60 or 70, I don't know. We start doubling our population until we got to close to 8 billion people right now. And that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. The only reason we're at 8 billion people is because we are feeding ourselves, clothing ourselves, housing ourselves, moving ourselves with fossil fuels. If you like to think that our reliance on the sun kept us in kind of a box, that you couldn't travel very far, you couldn't grow to a lot of crops, you couldn't have a lot of domestic animals, you couldn't have a lot of exchange, you couldn't have a lot of anything, you couldn't accumulate a lot of wealth, you couldn't accumulate a lot of food because you were in this box called solar power. I don't mean solar panels, or anything else. I mean solar power collected by plants. That was the box, the little box. We're stuck in this little box. Fossil fuels came along and made that little box a big box, because we had access to an energy source that had been laid up for us in the ground, underground, over hundreds of millions of years of geology. We discovered it, we recognized its properties, and we exploited those properties. And those things are called fossil fuels. They're mineral deposits. They're part of the geology of the earth, like any other rock. They're minerals. The fossil fuels are a battery laid down layer by layer by layer in the ground, a battery that stores solar energy. So as before, our little box was limited by how much sunlight would land on our earth in a day over the course of a year. And that's some places you could grow crops and some places you couldn't. And some places had a temperate climate and some places were too cold or some places were too hot. And so wherever the sun came down and however it did, that determined where you could have your settlements, where you could have your agriculture, many animals you could have, and how well you could do. Well, then we've discovered fossil fuels that stored sunlight. It's stored in the ground in a mineral form. You can dig it up over here, transport it over there, and use it over there. And the limits were lifted. And currently we have people living in places where people could barely survive before. Let's just talk about the Scandinavian countries, way up north, up near the Arctic Circle. It's cold up there, snowy all the time. It used to be the people that lived up there were literally hunters and gatherers up until fairly recently. They would hunt the seals, they would hunt the whales, they would eat the meat, they would, grow a few, herbs, whatever could grow in their environment, berries and things like that. They would use the wood from the forests and they would, make things out of wood, and their food came from the sea for the most part. And unless they're herding reindeer or yaks or something like that, they would get most of their food from the sea or from domesticated hardy animals that could live up near the Arctic Circle, and their diet was mostly meat. Well, look at those people now. with the infusion of fossil fuels, where you're not limited anymore to your little box. Now your box is this big, and they can fly in bananas. You can have bananas in Sweden. You don't grow bananas in Sweden, that I'm aware of, or Finland or Norway, but you can have bananas in Sweden, and you can have cocoa, and you can have coffee beans, and you can have peaches and apricots and all kinds of leafy greens, and in terms of meat, you're not limited to whale meat or seal meat or yak meat. Now you can have Kobe beef from Japan, and pork products from Italy, and pasta from Italy, and all kinds of things. It just gets flown in. It gets brought in on cargo ships. And now the population in Sweden, just to pick one, I'm not picking on the Swedes, I'm just sticking a pin in the map. Tens of millions of people living up there. Hundreds of millions of people living near the Arctic Circle. Hundreds of millions living near the Arctic Circle. And they have vital consumer lives. They wear $200 sneakers. They drive $60,000 cars. They live in $1 million homes. They're completely participating in the consumer extravaganza, and it's all delivered by fossil fuels. Almost none of it's created locally. I don't think there's any Norwegians that eat mackerel anymore. Maybe there are. Maybe it's a traditional thing and they still do it. But by and large, they eat McDonald's. They eat pasta from Italy. Foie gras from France. They eat whatever they want to eat. And maybe sometimes on special occasions, they eat mackerel, just like their ancestors did. But they don't have to. But that whole box, the big box, not the little box, the big box, is made possible by fossil fuels. Straight up. And not just the movement of those goods to those places, but the manufacturing of those goods wherever they are actually manufactured. Bananas are now grown in enormous plantations. And, the plantations are cleared with tractors, and they're irrigated with water that's shipped hundreds of miles. And the produce is collected into trucks and shipped to the port. And it's fossil fuels from the first seed into the ground. It's all fossil fuels. And then it gets on a ship and it gets shipped to Sweden, and then it's in a market, and the market has lighting and heating, and all that's fossil fuels, all of it, virtually. I mean, they have a lot of hydro in the Scandinavian countries, so they're probably in a better position in that regard. But the truck that goes to the port, gets the containers, brings it to the market, unloads them on the dock. That truck is a diesel. That's a diesel truck. So as we start to recognize that we are dependent on fossil fuels, and as we start to recognize, to our horror, that they're destroying the planet right out from under us, and we're going to have to stop using these things, then we're backed up. Whoa, hold on, really? Climate change requires us to stop using fossil fuels? Yep. Yeah, but we can't do that. Well, we can do that. There's just going to be a certain amount of pain from doing that. And if you're living in Scandinavia, you're saying, we're not looking at pain. We're looking at extinction. Because even if we go back to the sea, a lot of the things we used to catch are gone or on their way out from overconsumption. And that resource never fed a whole lot of people. And even if you throw a modern fishing fleet at it, the supply of fish is getting low. We've overfished it. And you're telling us now we have to survive on that? It's not just an economic play where a fisherman sells his fish to the pet food companies and pockets his riches and goes home and watches TV on a 70-inch TV. You mean that's not, we're going to have to eat that stuff? Well, there's enough for pet food, but there's not enough to feed a population of 10 million people. Yeah. Triage cuts hard. It cuts deep. There may be places where once we've decided we can't have fossil fuels, we just have to abandon them. So let's look at let's look at nations that are 100% dependent on fossil fuels. If you and I are sitting down at a table in one of the Scandinavian countries, or southern India, or some part of Africa, and we're having this discussion, and someone says, wait, we're dependent for everything on fossil fuels, then then discussion may end. Your situation is a situation where you're going to die. You're the patient who comes in to the intake facility, and the doctor, the engineer, the physicist looks at you and says, your injuries are fatal. Under a different set of circumstances, we could save you. But in a crisis, in an existential crisis, where there are hundreds of nations coming into this tent to be saved, I'm here to tell you, your injuries are lethal. You're going to die. So you go over in this tent. And we'll give you as much supportive care as we can, and we'll help you through your demolition with supportive care. But you're done, because your dependency on fossil fuels is lethal. And some other nation comes in and they say, well, we're a very poor nation. We have a traditional economic system, and it's based on agriculture. We have very small scale family agriculture, and we're not really dependent on fossil fuels. We sell our products into the world, but that's to raise money, to hard cash currency that we can then use to build infrastructure, cell phone towers, roads, bridges, ports of call, whatever, so we can kind of participate in the modern world. Wait, you said enough. You're going to be okay. It's going to hurt. You're going to be wounded by this. You've probably gone as far as you're going to go. Whatever you've got is all you're going to get. But it's not lethal in your case. You've maintained enough traditional supportive services, family size, traditional agricultural practices, traditional crops, that you eat things you grow, and they are suitable for your habitat. So you can go sit in the other tent. Now, you might have big problems. Your dependency on fossil fuels is not one of them, but there's a chance in the future the climate in your region is going to change so drastically that the things that are good for you now, like traditional agriculture, traditional irrigation, traditional practices, might break. So let's monitor that. Let's sit you over in the tent where they're okay for now. You're okay for now, and we'll watch you. We'll make sure that you're okay in the future. And at some point, you're done with us. You're not part of this problem anymore. Go home. Go home and monitor things and make sure you're okay. If you get into trouble, come back. But for now, you're good. Go home. This bunch over here is going to die. Their dependency on fossil fuels is lethal. They cannot continue. We can determine that. It's just basic physics and engineering. You're not going forward. This bunch, they can go home. Monitor your situation. This is the kind of things you have to look for. Make sure you're okay. And if you're not okay, come back. And then there's this group in the middle, into which most of the first world and the developed world falls. Most of it. You're highly dependent on fossil fuels. You've got a serious problem. Your problem spreads across everything you do. It's possible that your dependency on fossil fuels, the problem represented therein, is so huge that you're going to die. But we don't actually know that. You've got a lot going for you. You're a democracy. You've got a law and order. You have a constitution. You're internally coherent. You're not in the middle of a civil war. So there's a chance that you could pull through. If there's enough of a chance you could pull through, that we're going to send you to surgery. You still might die. Your fossil fuel dependency might be incurable and lethal, but we think maybe you can be saved. So we could send you to surgery. So surgery's that way. So there's a level of triage that we have to do at the nation level, maybe even the regional level. All the nations in a particular region end up suffering the same fate. All the nations with a particular internal disorder may suffer the same fate. All the regions that have been completely disrupted by capitalism and consumerism and have lost all of their traditional methods and are completely internally dysfunctional, they may all share the same fate. Okay, that's what triage is about. Can't save you. So now let's spend some time looking at the surgery, shall we? Let's look at surgery, and we're going to bring our patient in, and we're going to lay them out on the table, and we're going to have a bunch of physicians, physicists, engineers, biologists, educators. We're going to have all these people come around and look at this patient. Now, they have so many injuries that, again, we have to do triage, okay? They have so many injuries that if there's any chance of saving them, we have to, once again, things we cannot fix. Let's not even go there. Things that are just not that big of a problem with this patient. Let's leave them. We'll put a Band-Aid on, okay? A literal Band-Aid, a couple of stitches. We can fix that right now, and they'll be okay on that one. And then there's something in the middle. Again, triage. We have to address this right now. If we don't address this for this patient right now, they will die. The intake physician said, maybe we can fix you. And when they brought them to us, they whispered in our ear, this patient has the following things. You need to fix these first. Now, the things you can't fix are essentially amputations. The things that can't be fixed have to go. The things that can be fixed are just first aid. Definitely do those things right away. The things that have to be addressed right away are surgeries, bone setting, transfusions, brain surgery, heart surgery. Things that if we threw a lot of technology at it and specialty surgeons who we drag away from their last basket case, get them in here, and if they do their work really quick, we can save this patient, or in our discussion, this nation. We can save this country. We can save these people. If we bring in our surgeons and they do their magic really fast, we might be able to save these people. Here's a typical example of how that works out in practice for a given group of people. Again, we've decided that they can be saved. We're not going to talk about the nations that cannot be saved, except I'm just not going to talk about them. And we're not going to talk about the nations that are probably fine. Let them go home. They got a plan, but let them go home. Let's talk about the ones in the middle. Now, I'm really interested in that discussion because that's most of the developed world. That's the United States, probably Canada, maybe not so much, most of Central America, most of South America, all of Europe, most of South Asia, parts of Africa. It's a big chunk, actually, of the nations and the peoples that if we jumped in real quick, severed the limbs that can't be saved, apply the first aid where it does the most good, and bring in the surgeons, we could save these people. What does that look like? What does a controlled demolition look like? Controlled demolition. After we've done the triage, what's it look like? So, here we are in California. We are a developed region. We have lots of technology, lots of people, lots of smart people. We work well together, and we're 100% dependent on fossil fuels. Christ. All right, let's do this. What can we keep and what can we not keep? How can we save ourselves in the era when fossil fuels are gone? Things you can't have in the absence of fossil fuels. You cannot have a personal car that has an ICE, internal combustion engine. That's done. I guess if you're super wealthy and you can afford the, you know, import your own gasoline in your own tanker truck, I guess you can still have those things. But actually, maybe you can't, because as you go down the road in your Lamborghini, people are throwing bricks at you. So actually, no, you'll have to park your Lamborghini. You can go out in your garage and pet your Lamborghini if you want to, give it another wax job, but you can't ever dare drive it because people are going to be mad at you. Other things you can't have. You probably can't have anymore this notion that people are going to live way over there and they're going to work way over here. Now, if you had really functional mass transit systems, trains, buses, whatnot, and you coordinated the buses and the trains between the places where people really live and people really work, then you could kind of do that. And different nations in the world have actually figured that part out. So it's not like it's out of the question. But here where I live in the Bay Area, California, we never figured that out. We're totally car dependent, so you can't have that. Done. Cut that limb off. You can't have commuters. Oh, but wait, we can have electric cars. All right, well, that's a plan. Who's going to get electric cars? How are we going to make sure certain people get them who really need them? We have a lottery. What are we going to do? Where do those cars come from? We're not making them here. They have to be imported. From where? And how do we assure that supply? And so on and so forth. So that's not a slam dunk. Oh, we'll just electrify our rolling fleet of commuter cars. No, you won't. Now, if you plan for that, maybe you can do that. Maybe you have to move manufacturing onshore right here where people are and make your electric cars and then hand them out to people who need them or sell them to people who need them. Maybe bring all that here. But that's a plan. Are you going to do that? Because if you don't do that, if you don't figure out how to provide all these electric cars to all these people who are doing all these things, then you can't have that. You can't have commuters. And you have to cut that limb off. What about your food supply? The grocer saying, hey, excuse me, I have trucks come to my store every day between 11 o'clock at night and 4 o'clock in the morning. I get 4 or 5 18-wheelers come to my store. Some of them drop off a lot of stuff. Some of them only drop off a little, but it doesn't matter. It's 4 or 5 18-wheelers. And sometimes those days, sometimes they don't arrive because they can't find a driver. Sometimes they don't arrive because they can't find fuel or they break down. And now you're telling me that's just not going to be a thing at all? Wait, hold on. Oh, wow, that's true. Oh, but you have to make sure I have 18-wheelers coming to my store 5 times a night because that's the food that people are going to eat. Ooh, wow, yeah, that's a problem. Okay? So that's one where we really have to figure this out. This is not something we just cut off and throw into the compost pile. We have to figure this out because we're talking about food. My wife is talking to somebody out the window. Can't be helped. So we may decide as a group, we got to fix the problem with food. We have to really apply ourselves to this. So let's send that one into surgery because that's a guaranteed problem. If we don't solve that problem, we're going to die. So we're going to send that to the surgeons, the engineers, the physicists, the biologists, any political leaders who are thoroughly on board with this. We're going to send that to the experts and they're going to do the surgery. What else we got? Well, how about our education system? Well, education is not going to be that badly broken. Teachers, maybe we can have the teachers live in the schools. Maybe we can have more schools and maybe one-room schoolhouses. Maybe we can have certain houses in certain blocks just open up their living room, have all the little kids come in and have an adult there to teach the little children how to read and write. That's pretty easy. So that's kind of like first aid. We'll just put a Band-Aid on that one. And, we'll still have our big schools and maybe we can find a way to get the students to the schools, but we'll distribute the education out into the communities. Small schools run by parents and, 8 or 10 little kids and we'll figure out the rest of it, but it's not lethal. Figuring out the education problem is not lethal. It's not like the food problem or the electricity problem or the medical care problem. It's not lethal. We'll put a Band-Aid on it and we'll address it as we go. And obviously, if the children don't get a top tier education, hey, we're trying to survive here, okay? So top tier education, maybe that's great if you're a rich person and you're looking forward to sending your children to an Ivy League private school. But hey, the rest of us, we're trying to find bacon and beans here, okay? So your kid will make sure they get some kind of education, reading and writing at the very least. And And we're going to put a Band-Aid on that one for now. So that's going to be okay. We'll monitor that one. We'll make sure it happens. But we have a small project for education. Push that one off to the side. That's over here in the triage tent. We'll get back to it if it becomes a big problem. Right now, we're not too worried about it. But mention medical. Okay, so where hospitals are big, full of specialized equipment, full of specialized drugs that are manufactured by pharmaceutical companies in India. Factories in India, factories in Singapore, and in factories in Germany, and all these specialized drugs and all these tubes and parts and needles and all this stuff. Okay, well, that's one we think we got to have. But hold on, that requires a massive input of resources based on fossil fuels to keep people alive. Take kidney dialysis. Kidney dialysis isn't too technologically, deep, but it uses a lot of raw materials, and of course blood. Where's the blood coming from? I'm sorry. There's kidney dialysis is separate. So, but there's a lot of specialized equipment, and you need treatment, and people have to travel to get their treatment for their kidney dialysis. So that's it's not a lot of people, but are we going to help those people or not? Okay, so maybe that's another one that has to be sent to the surgeons. We have to figure this out. We have to figure it out right now because we're about to cut off fossil fuels. And whatever the kidney dialysis clinics need, it's going to have to be either created locally, or we have to source it at great expense and hazard to the climate by using fossil fuels or some other means to bring the stuff in from all around the world. And then we have to figure out, well, wait, are the countries that create these pharmaceuticals and create these equipment for us, are they going to survive? Whoa, okay, that's right. A lot of pharmaceuticals come out of India. India's in a bad place. Are they going to be able to do what they do? Now, let's say that they don't. Let's say India becomes an absolutely failed state. And under climate change and the withdrawal of fossil fuel resources, they become a failed state. And all of our pharmaceuticals of mention come from India. Well, then maybe we can't do kidney dialysis. Maybe we can't do hospitals. Maybe we can't do antibiotics and surgery. Maybe we can't do elective surgery. Well, what can we do in a hospital without antibiotics and tubes and IVs and blood transfusions and X-ray machines and CT machines and all this other stuff? What can we even do in a hospital? Well, okay, so physicians have been around for a long time, and they can set bones. They can do sutures. They can do sutures with, sewing thread and sewing needle, right? They can set bones. They can diagnose illnesses and tell you if you're bound to die, or you can be treated, or you just have a deficiency in some, in your diet or something like that. So we can still do medicine. We just can't do open heart surgery for everyone. Okay, maybe some. Then we have to decide, well, what about the fairness? If I can do open heart surgery on Jeff Bezos because he can bring his own pharmaceuticals in from wherever he has to go to find them or steal them, but I can't do open heart surgery on this other person, how do I decide who gets it and who doesn't? Whoa, that's painful. Wasn't ready for that. You mean the elites are going to get more services and treatment and everything else, education, food, water, all of it, than the rest of us? Okay. Is that a problem? Maybe that's not a problem. It's always been that way. The king always ate better than everybody else, so maybe that's not a problem. And maybe we just decide that's okay. Private hospitals, private institutions of learning, private transportation, private jets, private cars, private electricity, it's fine. It's unfair, but it's always been unfair. So we'll just check that box. They can do whatever they want. But this is triage. Some things we can save, some things we can't, and some things, if we work really hard, maybe we'll be able to. Reminder, this is all a controlled demolition. We assume in advance we're not going to save everything. We assume in advance we're not going to save everyone. We assume in advance some people will have an unfair, or simply, in reality, an advantage over others. They got more money. They've got more political influence. They're in a better part of the planet. They're just located physically in a place that's just not going to be impacted. Controlled demolition. We're going to be demolished. Either we withdraw our fossil fuels and try to save ourselves in something else, or we're just going to go over the Seneca Cliff. The climate's going to kill us, and the climate might kill us anyway. All right, but it will absolutely destroy us, and possibly all human life. Can't rule it out. All human life might be forfeit if we don't tackle this. We're already in the 6th mass extinction. We've already condemned millions of species to extinction because of our behaviors. Who's to say we're not one of them? Or even if it's not all humans extinct, who's to say every human in Africa doesn't go extinct? Who's to say every human in China doesn't go extinct? That would be a massive loss. Are we going to allow that? Well, if we're not going to allow that, then we have to do something. And the thing we have to do is stop burning fossil fuels. If we stop burning fossil fuels, that doesn't mean we don't get a demolition. We just get a different kind. If we deliberately decide not to burn fossil fuels and to save us from essentially a climate-driven extinction event, which absolutely is on the table, folks, absolutely on the table. If we decide to drop all the fossil fuels and save us that fate, we've got another fate. We're going to have to do triage to find out what part of our civilization and really what part of our population can go forward. Now, I've been discussing triage. I've been discussing painful choices. And remember, if you decide not to make the choices, if you're in this room and we're having this conversation and you're just losing your mind, you're just like, this is so immoral. This is so unfair. I can't believe we're talking like this, that we're going to cut off entire parts of the human species. There's going to be places that people live now that we're just going to abandon. We're having this discussion. This is so unfair. I'm leaving. I'm walking out. I'm not going to participate in this. If you want to walk out, then that puts you on the broad road. That puts you on the road of people who elected out of the adult conversation of what we're going to save, how many people we can save, how we're going to do that, what parts we can't save, we're going to have to abandon, what parts don't need much, and we're going to set them aside and use them as a buffer, and what parts absolutely need surgery now. You've walked out of that discussion. And so you're going to get whatever you get. You're signing up to get something or nothing. And whatever the something is, it's just random. Because you're going to go over a cliff. And you might, if enough people opt out of this process because it's so painful, it is so terrible, it's so immoral, it is so unethical, and they just opt out, then the rest of us can't have this conversation. If enough people opt out of the controlled demolition so that it just cannot be considered and it cannot be implemented, and we're not going there. We have to get away from this mindset that it's going down and we have to choose. I'm not choosing. I refuse to choose. I refuse to be part of this process. If enough people walk out, then we're all going over the Seneca Cliff. That's why there's a Seneca Cliff, because it's a thing. And even though you're taking the default route of the uncontrolled demolition, you still made a choice. You chose to throw yourself upon the mercy of the universe. Throw yourself and the entire future of humanity and a million other species that are now caught up in the 6th mass extinction, possibly, just possibly, not off the table, the entirety of life on this planet. You've chosen by choosing not to participate in this immoral, unethical exercise. You have chosen instead to go over the cliff in an uncontrolled way. And you've signed up to take whatever the universe tosses to you. Whatever random assemblage of species, whatever random assemblage of humans, whatever they were able to remember, whatever little things they carried on their back, whatever clothes they were wearing, you're willing to accept all that rather than have the adult conversation, which is extremely difficult. It's very painful. It's very embarrassing. It's very troubling. We did this to ourselves. We set this up so that we have to do this. We fucked up so badly, and we continue to this day, right now, to fuck up so profoundly that now we have to have this extremely difficult conversation about who can go forward, how we go forward, how we're going to spend our last remaining opportunities to fix things, what we're going to fix, how we're going to fix it, who gets to enjoy it. And then we have to deal with the whole fairness thing of what are we going to do with Jeff Bezos and the rest of the billionaires? Anything? Nothing? Just as an aside, if you choose to do nothing about the billionaires, which, let's face it, maybe you can't do anything about them, then it's just possible that the bulk of humanity, 99.9% of it, not a random number, I can calculate it for you if you like, 99% of humanity goes over the Seneca Cliff, gets whatever they get at random, but the billionaires and the other sociopaths and grifters and criminal class, they get whatever they want. And they become the representatives of the human species, living in their chalets in the mountains and on their super yachts out in the sea and in their walled cities, in the coastal areas and, their floating cities up above the clouds and whatever they put together for themselves. They get to sit it out and they get to be the owners of the world, in which case the meek did not inherit the earth. The meek were turned into compost. And, and let's be honest, if the meek end up being turned into compost, it's because the wealthy decided not to have the adult conversation I'm encouraging to have right now. The Donald Trumps of the world, the Joe Bidens of the world, the Vladimir Putins of the world, the Boris Johnsons of the world just never allowed it. No, we're not talking about that. We're not doing triage. We're not talking about the end of fossil fuels. No, that's not politically feasible. That's not economically feasible. That's not even fair. We're not doing that. And look, there's this broad road, wide road, beautiful, beautiful paved, smooth, flat, inviting, golden sunset, and everything glittering. And that's the path we're going to take. The path of least resistance, the path of no discussion, the path of no difficult choices, the path of no choices at all, except to choose to go on that path. That one choice, one master choice. I'm going to choose to ignore all this painful shit. And I'm going to go down that path. And I noticed that there's a sign, there's a road sign on that path that's called the Seneca Cliff. Okay, fine. Whatever that means. Here I go. One foot in front of the other. That's why that's the default. We are not being allowed to have the adult discussion about what the fuck we're going to do. As painful as it is, as difficult as it is, as immoral as it seems, it is, in fact, the only moral thing to do. And when there's an earthquake in your neighborhood or your city or county, whatever, and lots of people are injured and many people are dying, and you go to the hospital and there's a physician at the front and he says, okay, I'm doing triage. And when you realize what that means, you're going to say, wow, that's immoral as hell. Wait, one person is going to decide who gets treatment and who just has to sit over here on the side to die? Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. We're on a war footing. We're on a battlefield. We have mass casualties. We have thousands of people coming to this one hospital, and I've got an emergency room physician out front doing triage. Yes, that's what we're doing. And it's the same thing with climate change. We have a mass casualty event coming. 97% of the people of the earth are going to die just to get us back to the same number of people this planet could and did support in the year 1700. That's a 97% die-off, folks. Go do the math. Maybe even more than that. Maybe more like 98. Maybe 99. This planet, as an aside, this planet may be so fucked up right now. The resources, the habitat that can support people, the forests, the oceans, the life in the ocean, the wetlands, the grasslands, everything has been so massively deconstructed, lost, destroyed that it's by no means likely, by no means certain, that if we were to just drop the fossil fuels and go back to living like we did before, power of the sun, plants, domesticated animals, row crops, you know, trying to keep all of our modern technology, but just living off the power of the sun, not the power of coal, not the power of oil, not the power of natural gas, none of that in the mix. You and your ox in your field. The last time we did that, the year 1700, just my benchmark, there was about 350 million people on Earth. It's possible that our planet is right now so completely foobar that that lifestyle won't support 350 million people. That lifestyle might support 100 million people, 50 million people. It's entirely possible that this planet is now so completely screwed. And here we are in the sixth mass extinction. Let's not pretend everything's groovy on planet Earth. All right, let's not even start that argument. This planet could be so hosed up that if we stop burning fossil fuels, 99% of the human species will die. 1% may find enough habitat on this damaged planet to eke out an existence. And 1% of 8,000 million people is 80 million people. That's 1%. 80 million people. 80 million people. A 99% die-off isn't even an extinction event. A 99% die-off sounds horrendous. A 99% die-off of the human species. My God, the Black Death only killed 50% of the human species, and only in Europe. The 99% die-off of the entire human population sounds like the end of times. It's not. It leaves 80 million people. That's a huge number of people. And that number of people could include all the millionaires of the planet, eking out an existence using their robots and their last remaining fossil fuels that they agree to burn, and having the last of the electric cars and the last of the electric buses and the last of the electricity, and to funnel all that stuff, and the last of the nuclear power plants, and the last of the doctors, and the last of the nurses, and the last of the college professors, and the last of the private universities, and the last of the homes, and the last of the lumber, and the last of the plywood, and the last of all the modern stuff is enough for 80 million people for a long time, for the rest of history, for the rest of the time that humans are on Earth. They'll be fine. And that's the millionaires and the billionaires of the human race. That's what you're going to get if we don't have this painful discussion. They will be fine. We can't stop them from being fine. I mean, would we want to? I mean, someone needs to survive this shit, right? So fine. Goodness gracious. The worst that can happen is the 99% die off, because the Musks and the Gates and the Bezoses of the world, and the Trumps and the Macrons and the Putins, and it's a rogues gallery, right? Those people will be fine. Golf clap. What about you and me? I don't think Bill Gates is watching this. Let's not even assume that, okay? You and me, my dear, my beloved, my friend, my colleague. What about us? I don't think I make that. I don't think I make that train. And I'm about as well positioned as any random human on Earth. I am definitely, I would say I'm definitely in the 1%. I'm not a millionaire. But what places me in the 1% is that by just stupid luck, I am located in a place where all the money on Earth is going to come. And I'm a property owner. I have title. And provided that nothing terrible happens to me or my family, we will retain title to this land here in the place where all the money on Earth is going to come. I think that might work out. Now, it might not, because if Bill Gates shows up, if Bill Gates flees all of his hidey holes that he has all laid up everywhere, and he has to come to the Bay Area, and he needs a piece of property, and he wants a piece of property, and he stands in front of my house and says, I want this piece of property. He could probably go to the planning department and the mayor and the county supervisors and lay down everybody he meets, gives them a suitcase, $50,000, and tells them, now, I want that house. Here's the address. I want it. And do whatever you have to do to get rid of those people. In fact, I'll pay them any amount of money they want, but they have to leave. So it's possible that me and mine and you, if you happen to be living here, we might actually be evicted in some process that we can't even comprehend. Wait, I thought I owned that property. Wait, I thought I was secure in my ownership, title, and legalities and all this kind of stuff. And said, no, the state owns everything. The state owns everything. And anytime we want to, we can do eminent domain and boot you out. Okay, we have to pay you. Here's your $5 million. And my response to that is like, well, what can I buy with $5 million? All the houses in my neighborhood just sold for $6 million. By $5 million. I can't do anything with $5 million. I know you bought my property. You paid me 20 times over what I paid for it. But so what? I can't eat money. I've got solar powers. I've got water cisterns. I've got a backyard garden. I worked really hard for this stuff. And they just gave me $5 million. What am I supposed to do with that? Well, you're supposed to move to India. $5 million will buy you a lot in India or the Philippines or Taiwan. Or, it's like, yeah, but those places are now graveyards. How can I even do that? Well, it's not our problem. It's your problem. Here's $5 million cash. Come on now. That's a lot of money. Do something with that. Goodbye. So that could happen. I could not be as secure as I think. But my current thinking is where I am, I might be all right-ish. Maybe. I'm hedging my bets a little bit. I took delivery of $10,000 worth of air conditioning and heating. I've got about $80,000 worth of off-grid solar installed. I've got plans to dig cisterns and fill them full of water. I've got a garden. I've got $3,000 worth of food in the basement. So I'm hedging my bets quite a lot, actually. But if everything goes well, I should be okay. I did the triage for myself. I did it. Now you, in your community, you're going to figure that out. What can we keep? What can we bring forward? Where are we vulnerable? Do we have our own food? Do we have our own healthcare system? Is everything working? Do people have access to these things? Where do the children go to school? It's a long ways. Can we do that without fossil fuels? Can we do that without gasoline? No, yes, no. We've got to figure that out. Where's our food coming from? We need a food supply. We can grow things in our backyard, grow things in our front yard. We can knock our fences down and combine our properties. And people who don't really want to do agriculture or just have mobility issues, or they're old, aged, or they have small children, they just don't have the time. We'll use their backyard. We'll hold it in commons, and maybe we can figure this out. But that's an adult conversation. You have to have that conversation with your neighbors. Can you figure it out? We live in a suburb. The nearest food is 2 miles away, and the nearest school is 5 miles away. Wow, this isn't going to work without fossil fuels. We're in big trouble. Holy smokes. How can we fix this? Well, yeah, we could have more one-room schoolhouses. We could have somebody in the neighborhood become a dry goods store. They got their garage. We've got a couple of garages nearby here. We'll turn these into dry goods stores. We'll have wholesalers deliver food, goods, materials to us. A broadcloth. Do we have anybody who would like to learn how to sew? How about laying up food? How about if we have our own food supply? We still need silos to store it in. And okay, well then we need some way to make flour. We need some way to make pasta. We need if we're going to grow soybeans, we have to have some way to make tofu and soy milk. Is that equipment? What kind of equipment? Where's that equipment come from? Oh, it all runs on electricity. Where's our electricity come from? Okay, well we get it from the grid, but let's not do that anymore. Let's have as much solar as we can have in our community and battery backup, and possible, if maybe wind and some other things for inclement weather. And, maybe we can figure that part out. But this is the adult conversation, isn't it? This is the conversation nobody wants to have. This is not the broad road with the beautiful pavement and the sparkling trees and the beautiful sunset and the Seneca Cliff at the end. This is the other path, the narrow path, the winding path, the path of nothing but tribulations, the path of nothing but difficult decisions, the path of cooperating with each other, the path of talking and sharing ideas and not being so polarized all the time about every fucking thing, except the right things. This is the path of we don't know what's going to happen. But God damn it, we're going to try to figure it out. And right now it's the path nobody's taking. Nobody wants to. They're not getting any leadership that tells them this is the path they need to take. There's nothing. The Chamber of Commerce doesn't want you on that path, becoming independent of them and their consumerism. Everybody wants you on this other path. Driving, flying, moving goods around the planet, banking systems, credit, and everyone has their job and they get their little token at the end of the week, end of the month, and they go out and they buy their sneakers and they buy their pasta and they buy their tofu and they buy their Disneyland tickets. And it's just glorious, right? And yet those are things you can't have. Without fossil fuels, you can't have 8 billion people, and you cannot have your own car, flying all over the planet, moving goods everywhere from one place to another, moving money everywhere from one place to another, and you can't have a job. There's not going to be anybody to give you money for doing some bullshit job. You're going to be too busy tilling your backyard, pulling up the sod, digging cisterns, collecting water, sharing ideas with your neighbors, grinding your wheat, grinding your soybeans, planting trees, pulling up asphalt, digging into the dirt, repairing the soil, creating schools, creating clinics. You're going to be too busy for that shit for your bullshit job. You're not going to have an income. You're going to have more work to do than you ever could have conceived in your entire life, completely unprepared for the amount of work you have to do, completely unprepared for the nature of that work. No idea how you're going to do these things. No one you know knows how to do these things. No one has a shovel. No one's prepared. But that is the work of the moment. And you won't have time to go to Disneyland or to sit there from 7 o'clock in the evening until midnight watching sports channel on your 70-inch TV. It's a narrow, windy, thorny road. But it's the only way out of this. You have to drop your dependency on fossil fuels. And then once you've figured out how to do that, you have to get into conversation with your neighbors in your community and any leadership that'll still talk to you and figure out how you're going to do this in common. How are we going to save ourselves collectively? We know this is over. This is done. There are things that cannot go forward. Cut off those limbs and put them out there. There are things that we're glad to have. This is going to work for us. We've got this one nailed. Okay, put that over here. Just monitor it, make sure it's going to go forward. And then there's a bunch of things that need surgery now, right now. And some of those things aren't going to make it through surgery, and some of them will. But if we don't bear down hard right now and figure that out, we're not going to be able to save those things. And they will randomly disappear, or you'll get something randomly left over. And it may not be the things you needed or wanted. It may be stuff that is maybe nice to have. Thanks for the memories. So this is a long video. This is a lot of bad news. This is very, very painful. Localizing everything you are dependent on now is virtually impossible. The door of opportunity is closing. It can be done still with great effort, but the chance of pulling that off is evaporating. It must be done now. You must figure out how to live a life with any modernity at all in your neighborhood, in your community, with what you've got. And if you ain't got it and you need it, figure out how to reproduce that. It's a long list of things you're going to need. Things you don't even think about now, but things that used to be super, super common in the year 1700. Every town of any size, any hamlet or village of any size at all, had these things. A miller. And by the way, you're going to notice a lot of these are surnames for families. That's no accident. They were very, very important services. And you know, that guy over there, he's the miller. That guy over there, he's the carpenter. You know, you need a miller. So when you grow your grains, corn or wheat or rye or whatever, oats, you can mill them into flour. You're going to need some sort of fiber production. So and producing fibers is a big deal. So you're growing the cotton or the flax or the hemp, and then you have a whole way of treating that stuff into fibers. And then you have a way to collect the fibers into thread called spinning. And then you have to collect the threads into cloth called weaving. And so you have weavers and you have fullers and you have all these people just collecting fibers to make clothing. And then you have people who sew or mend clothing. So tailors, seamstresses, all kinds of people who work with cloth. And to do these things, you need looms. You need ways to manipulate the fibers. For cotton, they used the old-time cotton gin to separate the seeds from the cotton. You're going to need an entire industrial footprint to run all this stuff. Do you have that? No. Do you want cloth in your life? That's a pretty modern invention. Do you want that? Sure you do. You can't have that right now without fossil fuels. Without fossil fuels, you cannot have clothing. And least of all, going to the Foot Locker and buying $200 sneakers. I mean, that's way out. That's way out of reach. But do you have a shoemaker? A shoemaker will take leather from animals, right? Cowhide, sheep hide, whatever, horse hide, and work the leather. So that means you have a whole nother industry of just harvesting leather off of animals, which means you have to have a whole nother industry of domesticated animals that are raised for whatever, meat, milk, and hides. So you have a whole industry just to provide the hides for the leather makers who can tan the tanners, right? The tanners, the leather workers who can create the leather products, who can then pass those over to the shoemakers, the cobblers, who can then make the shoes that people are going to wear on their feet when they're doing their regular life, working in the fields, working in the smithy, riding horses, whatever they're doing. Oh, riding horses. So now you need a whole industry of how to manage horses, and the horses need saddles. That's leather again, and there are saddle makers, people who are really, really good at making saddles, and you also need a blanket to put under the saddle on the horse's back. And eventually you're going to want to transport things, so you're going to need carts. You'll need a wheelwright to make wheels. The invention of the wheel was pivotal in human civilization. You don't know how to make a wheel. Nobody knows how to make a wheel. We may be at a point where nobody alive knows how to make a wheel. So you need a wheelwright, and people to make wheels and axles and wagons, the coach work that goes on top of that. And then to transport things, you're going to need barrel makers called coopers. And you have all your barrels and things that go in the barrels, like the miller who took the wheat and made the flour goes in the barrel, goes in the wagon with the horse, goes across town to deliver to the baker. And the baker makes the bread, and the baker has an oven. And how does the baker fire the oven? Well, maybe we're still using natural gas to fire the ovens. Maybe we're using electricity. That would work. Does the baker have solar panels? Maybe you make sure the baker has solar panels, because without solar panels, you can't have bread. But you can't have bread without flour, and you can't have flour without wheat. And you need yeast. Does the baker have yeast? Is the baker growing yeast? Is the baker responsible for the yeast? The miller is responsible for the flour, but is the baker responsible for the yeast? Well, where's the yeast coming from? I just made a loaf of bread this morning, which is why I'm thinking about this right now. In fact, I'd love to go in there and eat it. I mean, you want these things? Seriously, I'm asking you, do you want these things? Because if you want these things, that's how you have things. Right now, your things come to you from places you can't even point to on the map, and they're delivered to stores with 18-wheeler trucks that pull up 5 times a night and disgorge their contents. And then you go down there and swipe your lovely credit card and walk out with whatever it is: shoes, bakery goods, flour, rice and beans, chard, chocolates, whatever they're selling. You have no transparency into how that stuff is made or where it comes from. We have a lot of work to do, people. If we want to become fossil fuel independent and reliant on the sun for all of our activities, like we were in the year 1700, the last time we had this figured out, then you need to figure out how to provide for yourself. Now, it may be that we don't need horses and wagons. We might, because it's convenient. The horse is always there, and all you have to do is feed them grass. And the wagon lasts for generations, and it's just real convenient. There's nothing to repair, no fuel to pour into it, no charging station, no solar panels. The horses breed themselves. You raise them. They love you. You love your horse, and you work together, and you have a great time, and you value each other enormously. And going back to a horse-drawn wagons could be really therapeutic, right? But you still need electricity for the baker and for the wheelwright who has to turn the spokes on a lathe and some other things. So we make sure we have modern technology for the things that really are not too feasible, for things that don't work well without it. Electricity. Do you want the internet? I helped build the internet. I know all about the internet. I would love to have the internet. I would love to hear what's going on in the rest of the world. I would love to hear people exchanging ideas. I would love to be able to go on the internet and find the wheelwright in the next town over and order a wheel, or to communicate with the miller and say I'm going to show up on Wednesday next, and I'd like to pick up 50 pounds of flour, and just send an email and have that person send me an email back saying, yeah, sure, we'll be here. Or no, we can't do it Wednesday next, but we can do it Friday. And then I go on Friday. That would be awesome. Absolutely awesome. But the internet is complicated and complex. And, we may have to have non-global internet access. I can create an internet between two cities. We can have everything we need to do that. We may not be able to have network access to Chicago from here, or Dubai, but we can certainly, or London, but we can certainly have network access to the next city over. And we might have small networks between groups of people who really need to communicate that fluidly. And the rest of it, I guess, is just news. By the way, there was a networking system called Usenet that predated the internet, that was highly distributed servers. The networking was completely ad hoc. You could do it with dial-up modems over the plain old telephone system, POT system. And movement of information was slow. There wasn't streaming. There wasn't automatic access, but you could, over the course of a day, have communications and get information back. And you could ask questions of your peers on Usenet and get answers back in a day or less. And it was just packet forwarding, packet switching. You could do email, you could do simple text messaging, and it was just over the phone system, plain old telephone, which we could have. The old style switch telephone networks were really low tech. Of course, they're not anymore, but they were really low tech. We could recreate those kind of things. Did you know that the old telephone systems, the switchboards, were actually operated by humans, mostly women? We could easily have that. There's no electrical components in there. It's just wiring, point-to-point wiring, with some additional things to ring bells and flash lights for people to know that there's a call coming in or a call needs to be routed. And then you have a switchboard with a woman who just unplugs this thing and plugs these two things together. Now those people are talking to each other. And that's her job. It was great work. It was really important work for the community. And these were very important people. They had a really important pivotal place in their community. Switchboard operators. So we could have plain old telephone systems operated by humans, patching calls together. We'd have to run wires between our houses for the plain old telephone, and we'd have to have different types of communications devices in our homes. But we could have phones. Could we have cell phones? Possibly. We may be able to grow locally, local grown cell phone towers. Not a lot of them. You might actually have to cross town to get near a cell phone tower to place a call. But we could have cell phone towers, solar powered, point to point. We have one. The next town over has one, and there's one more over there, and we're in constant communication. And I can make a phone call to the next town over if I'm in position correctly, because there's a cell phone tower in our city. We put it together. We built it ourselves, solar powered, and it communicates with their cell phone tower directly through point-to-point link, and they built theirs. And we're working on getting some more in the local communities, exporting our technology, and we're going to have a little cell phone network that people can use. Would you want that? Because this sprawling global cell phone network that you can call anybody you want to in London or anywhere else, is all fossil fuel dependent. I'm telling you, it's insane. It's one of the first things that's going to fail. The amount of electricity and the massive maintenance of keeping these things working is just not going to work. Within months, that's just going to be gone. If there's no way to keep that running, then it's going to be the first thing to fail, because it fails all the time anyway. But maybe we could rebuild it. Smaller, local, with local talent, local equipment. We know how it works. We got a bunch of people who've been trained. They can maintain these towers. They can program them. And, we're real happy that we now have a use for our cell phones again. Do you want that? Can you do that? You can't do that. You don't know anybody can do that. Nobody can do that. We'd have to completely reinvent that technology to have it work point to point, rather than through big conglomerates like AT&T and T-Mobile and all the others. If you want that kind of thing in your community, you're going to have to build that kind of thing in your community, just like the old Usenet. It's a lot of work. It's really painful. It's not as fun as it is right now. But do you want these things at all? Well, then you got to figure that shit out. You're just going to have to figure it out. It's still demolition, but it's a controlled demolition. Do you want food? Well, then you got to figure out how to grow food locally, and you're going to have to tear down some buildings, get back to the soil, demolish those buildings, recycle the materials. You're going to love to have those materials. Dig up the soil, plant the crops, control demolition. You did it deliberately. And you don't need all these wide boulevards, 8 lanes of asphalt. You're going to have to get out there with teams, crowbars and picks, and maybe a couple of heavy lifters, front loaders, if you can still find one. Tear up all that asphalt. Level all that dirt. Plant your orchards. We're going to end up with all these long, narrow orchards. People are going to say, wow, that's a funny shape for an orchard. Well, this used to be a freeway. This used to be a boulevard. This used to be a shopping mall. And this one over here, this one that's really square, that used to be a parking lot. If you go out there, you can still find pieces of asphalt in the dirt. Used to be a parking lot. And this place where all these people are living, this used to be a parking structure. And the ramps are really useful. People go up and down. And the top, where we have all those trees, we used to park cars up there. But instead, we hauled in dirt. We laid it out. It's 3 feet deep. And we planted orchards. And now you go up there, you have fruits and nuts. We did that deliberately. We deliberately did that. We did that. And what isn't housing is growing food. And what isn't growing food is waste. It's waste. We have to fix that. Okay, that's the painful conversation. That's the controlled demolition. That's what it looks like. And please note, it's all local. It's extremely local. It's in your neighborhood. It's your town. It's your neighbors, your family, your local businesses, and you're coming together to figure this out. You're all agreeing that it's not going to work. You're all agreeing we're in the jaws of a disaster. We have to figure out what we're going to bring forward, and then we have to make sure that our community, whatever this group of people is, has the resources they need to go forward and not participate in the 6th mass extinction. That's the work of the moment. It's not pretty. And there'll be people who tell you that it's immoral, it's wrong, it's unjust. Have that discussion. It's unjust to consider a world where 99% of the human species might actually be murdered, leaving 80 million people left on the planet. 80 million people. That's still a lot of people, by the way. But that's unjust to have that conversation. So maybe you don't. Or maybe you don't participate. And maybe that little bit of expertise you could have brought, you withhold. And the rest of us are clueless. There's something you could have told us that, yeah, that you got a problem here. Here's your problem. I know it's going to be a problem. I don't even want to think about it, but I have to, because this is my domain. It's my wheelhouse. I'm telling you, you're going to have a problem. You're talking about growing your own wheat. You don't have a mill. But you don't come. And we're all talking about growing wheat and pulling up the asphalt and planting the wheat and threshing the wheat and harvesting and silos. And there was no one in the room who was a baker or a miller. The millers and the bakers don't show up. And so they can't tell us. You're going to need this other thing. You're going to need that other thing. You're going to need solar power for your ovens. You're going to need solar power for the mill. You're going to need a mill. What goes into a mill? You didn't show up. You took your expertise and you left. You went to Disneyland or something where you could feel better about yourself, while the rest of us are struggling to figure this out and failing because you weren't there. So your personal feelings about this are really our vulnerability. Your willingness to walk away from this painful discussion, this painful adult moment, your willingness to walk away is our demise, our destruction. Because it's a narrow, winding, thorny road. And the more people we can get on that journey, the more likely that we will arrive at the end. And not a bad place. You know, if we can still have people and goods and food and clothing and shelter, and we can all be industrious and all have a purpose, and we can all be resilient and have our own food and have our families nearby and have our children in schools and knowing our neighbors and participating with everybody. And you know, if we don't have a bullshit job at the end of that trail, who's to say it's really that bad? Who's to say that it's terrible? Who's to say that having the adult conversation about the controlled demolition takes us to a dark place? Who's to say that it's that dark? The people who arrive, who have purpose and responsibility and a grip on existence, will be very happy. The children born into that world will be very happy to be born into that world with their parents and their elders and their neighbors and the other children in the neighborhood, and going to their little school and learning their little things that they learn, and growing up to be a miller or a wheelwright or a carpenter or a baker. They'll be really happy with that. But we have to make sure that happens for them. We have to make sure. We are in the terrible position, this terrible, dark moment when we have to have this awful, terrifying discussion about how to control this demolition, because it's coming. We are in it. It's here to stay, and it's going to drag us along, kicking and screaming, on whatever pathway made of broken glass that lay in front of us. That's where we're going. And it can either be 1% of the human population, or 3%, or 5%, or something like that, or maybe 10%. Maybe 10% of the human population makes this terrible, broken glass journey. But what determines how many people end up at the end of the age of chaos, that decision is in our hands. We are the ones who determine who will survive. That's our challenge. Our challenge is to man up, as they like to say, come to the table, set aside our grievances, set aside our fear and our desires, and have the adult conversation, the conversation of the ages. The conversation, frankly, that no civilization has ever had. The time came for them and they blew it. And they disappeared. They went over the Seneca Cliff and became footnotes in history. They became shards of pottery and frescoes buried under dirt and murals on the wall and great colossal statues that no one even knows who that is anymore. That's what happened to them. We have even farther to fall. We have risen so high, and the way down is going to be cataclysmic. And I don't think we could save everybody. Just like if there was an earthquake and thousands of people were injured and in the process of dying or dead, and they all came to our hospital, and that one team sitting out front in the hospital in the parking lot doing triage. Lonely, terrible, demoralizing, depressing work. Who's going to die? Who's going to be fine? Who gets surgery and what kind of surgery? Making those terrible decisions over and 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 over again. Soul destroying, but at the end of which is a chance to start over for somebody. Somebody gets to start over. We do not escape from the age of chaos. We do not escape from global heating. No chance. We do not escape from climate change. We do not escape from refugee crises, food shortages, water shortages, political outrages, wars for oil, wars for water, wars for grievance. We do not escape these things now. We now go into the jaws of chaos. And we have to decide how we're going to manage that, how we're going to do that. And if we don't, it'll happen at random, and the rich will be fine, and they'll make sure they're represented well in history. They'll write the history books. They'll write us out. We never happened. There was no bad decisions made by anybody because those people never existed. And it's all been Garden of Eden, roses and honey, and, that's what happens when the 1% make it. Most likely. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe that's how it has to be. Maybe that's how it has to be. I mean, I don't like it like that. 1%. And only the sociopaths. I don't like it. But since I don't like it, that places me on the thorny, winding, dark, narrow path of a controlled demolition. So be it. It's not really in my hands. All I can do is talk about it. All I can do is shout into the wind, into the storm, say these things, and be ignored. And then after this, I put on my work boots and my gloves, and I go in the backyard and I fix things. And I buy solar panels, and I borrow equipment, and we buy soybeans and rice and beans, and we just do what we can do. And I don't have to have a discussion with any of you people to do those things. I know what needs to be done. I'm on the path. I'm on the narrow, winding, thorny path, dragged over broken glass into an uncertain future, dominated by chaos. God damn it.